Yo, what is up guys? Welcome to another video on AJ's Thoughts on Movies. Today we're starting episode 1 of my 3-part series of reviewing the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. As promised, we're going to dive into each one of them individually. I'm going to tell you my thoughts on the film, where I think the story could be struggling a little bit and where it really takes off. I'm going to be analyzing the action, the costuming, and I'm a big fan of Batman, so I'm going to be a little bit critical of it. Hopefully you guys like the video. If you do, drop a thumbs up down below. Subscribe to the channel. It helps out a lot. But without further ado, let's get into it. So as the title implies, this is a Batman origin movie. It is the beginnings of Batman. But the first hour or so is actually more about Bruce Wayne and his journey into becoming Batman. And I actually really like that we're getting kind of like the year one story from the comics. Overall, this is a film that I really enjoy. I think they did a really good job at capturing who Bruce Wayne is and who Batman is and how they're both the same and different at the same time. And I think that Christian Bale actually does a really good job at turning on and off the party boy Bruce Wayne, the real Bruce Wayne who is damaged by the death of his parents and wants to avenge them by bringing justice to Gotham. And then he's also good at bringing the character of Batman to life. He describes that when he put on the cowl for the first time and it gives you like such a big neck, he said it was like very virile and panther-like, and he says he used that to turn it into like this animal, this creature of the night, and that is what Batman is. I really do love the beginning of this movie where he's in the prison and he says that he's gonna fight these guys and he's just trying to eat his breakfast, and then he says that awesome line of "You're not the devil, you're practice," giving us a really good look into Bruce Wayne's mindset of trying to beat up criminals, and he's practicing and he goes to such extreme lengths just to find them and to be ready, as he says. The fight scene is actually really well choreographed, and I like all the close-ups between Christian Bale and the other actors, and we can see that he's actually doing these stunts, and it's really cool how the camera is angled, that we can see all of it happening, and it feels very raw and very brutal, and he's not very skilled, but he is able to take on these guys. I think it's just like 8 guys all at once. And he does that because he has the will to act. His anger is giving him power, but it's very unrefined. And later on, that's where Liam Neeson's character, Ducard, comes in to take that anger, to take that guilt, and to turn it into something else. If you guys watch my Phantom Menace review, you guys know that I love Liam Neeson. I think he's a really fantastic actor, and he's really good at playing those mentor characters and being the good guy and like that father figure, and he is that to Bruce in this movie. If you look at the Dark Knight trilogy as a whole, you can see that each movie has its own separate theme. It's something that is clearly put in front of us throughout the entire movie, and in this one the main theme is fear. We can see that Bruce is trying to overcome his fear as a child. It's fear that leads him into the alleyway that gets his parents shot. It's fear that he's trying to prey on the criminals and make them feel that same fear that he did as a kid. And then with our first real Batman supervillain, Scarecrow, his whole identity is fear and preying on the fearful and making them relive their worst fears through his gas. And I think that Christopher Nolan does a good job at explaining why fear is so important to overcome. It turns us into heroes when we gain courage. The training sequence at the beginning of this movie is probably my favorite part in the whole movie, of just Bruce learning to be like a ninja, training for the League of Shadows, and learning about all of the theatricality and deception, our powerful agents. We can see him learning to fight with Ducard on the ice. I love that they incorporated those little gauntlets. Like, everyone's seen them in Batman's suit, but now they actually have a purpose to block the katanas, and I think that's a really cool idea. We also get a lot of good dialogue between Bruce and Ducard, and why Ducard is doing what he does. Like, he's lost his wife, and he too is trying to make criminals feel the same fear and bring justice to them. He says many times that criminals can't be tolerated. Another cool moment is when in the flashback Bruce returns from college and he's going to the hearing of Joe Chill, and then we get his growth, really, is that he was going to shoot Chill. He wanted vengeance on his parents' death. When he gets a little wake-up call from Rachel and she says that justice isn't vengeance, and then he goes to see Falcone and learns that he isn't who he needs to be. And then when Bruce has burned all his belongings and gotten the homeless guy's coat and he's thinking about where he's going to go, he just looks to the ship and starts running, and then we get that classic Batman theme again. and it's like he's running away, but he's also running towards Batman. And I think that's so cool that he's running towards like this shadowy area that's supposed to symbolize him becoming the Dark Knight. And we see that really he has learned his lesson when Ra's al Ghul and Ducard have finished his training, and now he's supposed to execute this man to prove his conviction to the League of Shadows and to Ra's al Ghul and to the idea of vengeance. And Bruce says, I will not be an executioner, because he's learned already that that is the difference between justice and vengeance. After some explosions and Bruce actually saving Ducard's life after he betrays him. Also, can we talk about that little scene where Bruce is hanging, he's grabbing him off that cliff, and then he does a one-arm bicep curl of Liam Neeson to get him up? I get that adrenaline's a factor, and I get that he's very strong and he's becoming Batman, but that is just impossible. I'm sorry. But anyway, after that scene, we're actually introduced to the character of Alfred. We've seen him in the flashbacks a little bit, but now this is him in the present. And I love that they got Michael Caine to play Alfred. I think he does such a good job at bringing that sarcasm and humor, but also wisdom, and he definitely is another father figure to Bruce. There are so many people that try to fill the void in Bruce's heart, but at the end of the day, it's really about Bruce becoming like his father, and I think that's a cool little dynamic that this movie has. I think that Gary Oldman does a really good job, like probably the best I've ever seen, at bringing Jim Gordon to life. He just translates exactly what the comic books was. He's a great guy, he's a good cop, and he's not going to change his morals no matter what's put in front of him. Okay, and let's talk about the first outing as Batman. So I am kind of conflicted. I really like this scene. I think it does a good job at showing the fear that the criminals feel for him. I think that, him showing who he is to those guys, and he gets his name around and people are starting to fear the Batman. But at the same time, it wasn't everything that I kind of wanted it to be. I wish that the fight scene was a little bit better. I'll talk about that more later. But I just feel like as the first outing as Batman, and it's the first time that the audience is actually seeing him as Batman, it wasn't all that it needed to be. I think that with this movie's theme being fear, having Scarecrow in it is a perfect choice. And I think overall they did a really good job at translating Scarecrow from the comics onto this big screen without making it like comic booky and cartoon. It actually feels like somebody that could actually exist, where it's like a man of science and he's experimenting on inmates, and like the costuming is even just like a mask, and that's all it is. I actually think that the twist of Ducard being Ra's al Ghul and Liam Neeson playing that character was handled really well. I think that it wasn't something that we saw coming necessarily, and I think that Liam Neeson does a good job at transitioning from the good guy mentor into the villain who's willing to do anything to see justice done. And I love that Bruce makes the decision to destroy his reputation, destroy his name in order to save the people and get them out, even though in Ra's al Ghul's eyes they're already dead. And it's kind of a good way of showing that Bruce really is a hero, and ultimately a hero makes sacrifices for others, and this is something that he did. He sacrificed his house, he sacrificed his name, and I think it's just a cool scene overall. There's a message that we've been getting all throughout the movie of Bruce's father saying, Bruce, why do we fall? So we can learn to pick ourselves back up. And I think they say that about 4 times. Alfred says it about twice. So Bruce is defeated. He feels like he's lost. The city's gone. He feels like his father's name has been destroyed. And then Alfred says that line again, why do we fall? So we can learn to pick ourselves up. And when I was watching this, I actually heard it as, why do we fail? So we can learn to pick ourselves up. And I just think that's a great line. It's something that we can actually attribute into our own lives. And as Bruce is going into the Narrows and we're getting our final climax of the movie, we're switching from a realistic Batman movie kind of into a horror flick. In that Scarecrow's gas has now been released over the entire city, and they do a really good job at using those special effects and making Batman look scary and making Scarecrow look scary, and everyone's like so afraid that they're willing to kill each other over it. And the final battle between Bruce and Ra's al Ghul is handled very well, in that Ra's al Ghul is the guy that trained him, and he keeps saying, predictable, I'm the one that trained you, don't you have anything new? And then Bruce is showing him some stuff that he's learned as Batman. But one thing I always wondered, and some other people have wondered as well is that if that microwave emitter is actually made from Wayne Enterprises, couldn't you just turn it off? Or at the very least, couldn't Bruce have just blown it up and then it would have been fine? Okay, so obviously this movie has many pros, but there are some cons, so let's talk about it. While I do think that the pacing of this movie is actually handled very well, there are a few moments where all of a sudden we're going to a flashback and we're supposed to transition from where we were back to a young Bruce or to a different part in the story. I wish that the flashbacks were split up a little bit better. There's a moment where we're seeing Bruce's parents killed, and after he's, gotten the fear of the bats, and then they go to the opera. Also, if a boy is traumatized by bats and he's like clearly having some PTSD over it to where he's staying in bed, I don't think it's a good idea to take him to the opera about bats. This flashback scene alone lasts about 15 minutes all by itself, and we start to forget where we were. We go from training with Ducard back to Bruce as a child. All of a sudden, oh yeah, we're training with Ducard again. So I just wish they were kind of split up a little bit and we didn't have to digest it all at once. There are a few scenes in this movie where Bruce is literally the Batman, and I mean that by he summons bats as his companions, and I just think that's a ridiculous idea. I know they've done it a few times in the comic books and in other movies, but like these aren't trained animals. You can't just summon them because you put a signal out. And the scene where he first discovers the Batcave and all of a sudden is like swarmed by like literally 500 bats or more. And then he goes, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to be afraid, and stands up and he's just standing in the bats. It's a cool scene if you think about it symbolically, but if you think about it in real life, and this movie is supposed to be real life, it's supposed to be grounded, it's just ridiculous when you think about it. Every time I see that scene, I just go, no. Batman vs. Superman did the same thing, but it was in a dream that Bruce had, and they made the audience realize that it was ridiculous and that he was being lifted up by bats. Another big issue I have with this film is actually the fight scenes. I feel like the later movies, Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises, do a much better job at positioning the camera to make us see the fight scenes actually happen. I know that the stunt coordinators and the fight coordinators did a really good job at discovering a new technique called KC fighting, and if you watch in the special features, they show what this technique is actually supposed to look like, and then they adapted it for this movie, and it's a really cool fighting style that nobody's ever seen before that uses a lot of elbows and takedowns. But because they cut so many times, when you see Batman on his first outing, it's supposed to be through the eyes of the criminal, and so in that way it's supposed to be like him too fast to see, or he's blending in with the darkness or something like that. But for us as the audience, it just takes me out of the fight and takes me out of the action when I can't see what's going on. It's just cut after cut after cut after cut, and they do that in almost every fight scene besides the prison fight. When we are back in Gotham and the fear gas has been released over the entire Narrows, Batman is taking out some of Ra's al Ghul's men, and we get that same choppy cut that we can't see what's going on. We hear it, but we can't see it. So the fight scenes just, for me, don't do it for me in this movie. In The Dark Knight, they do a much better job at positioning the camera to where we can see everything that's going on. They have a wide shot and everything's lit when the Joker first takes Rachel and he's just taking out these guys. That's the same fighting style that he uses in this movie. Why couldn't we see it this time? And then this is probably pretty controversial, but I'm actually not a big fan of the Tumbler either. I think that the Batmobile should be a futuristic looking car that should get Batman from A to B faster than any other vehicle. This is a tank, and they even call it a tank. It's not Batman to me when he's taking out police cars and like killing people. And then he's destroying public property. I think at one point he drives on the roof of a church. And that whole chase sequence with the Tumbler just doesn't do it for me. I don't think it's very Batman. I feel like the action itself is cool, and I think that the Tumbler looks cool, but it's not a Batmobile, and I don't think it should be called one. Another little nitpick, if you will, is that moment where Ra's is revealing himself to Bruce in his house, and then he starts to drop facts that maybe he was involved in Bruce's father's death, and in that way he created Bruce, and like they've been trying to destroy Gotham for a while. I think that tie-in is a little weak in my opinion. I don't think that they needed to put that in the film. Why couldn't we just see that Bruce's parents were killed by the criminals, and that's why he wants to become Batman, to take on criminals, and along the way, there are supervillains who are really trying to do some danger, and that turns him into a superhero. And then my last complaint is the romance between Rachel and Bruce. I feel like their friendship is actually very believable and very good, but them trying to turn it into a romance the last 10 minutes of the movie, and then Rachel's dialogue at the end is just total bullcrap. I don't believe a word she's saying when she's saying that she loves Bruce, but Bruce is the mask and Batman is the actual man. It doesn't make sense to me. I think they could have just left it as a friendship and left it as something that didn't really need to be developed. Or if they're going to pursue a romance, maybe do a little cliffhanger at the end for the next movie, but don't just rush it at the end and then say no, it's not going to happen. Overall, I feel like as far as the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, Batman Begins is actually forgotten more than the other ones. Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises get a lot more credit than Batman Begins, but I think that this movie is really good. I feel like I'm a sucker for origin stories, and I think that this does a really good job at telling Batman's origin story. We've never got to see how he got his training. We never got to see how he learned to be that creature of the night and to be that stealth figure that nobody could find. Where other movies fail to bring in multiple villains and make it easy to follow along, this movie succeeds. I love that we get 3 different villains in Carmine Falcone, and then Scarecrow, and then Ra's al Ghul. And they're all connected. It makes it really easy to follow along. And to me, they're all just as menacing as the one before them. I think that the action could be a little bit better, and we see in the later movies that it does become better. This is the first movie, so I give it a little bit of a pass. But Batman Begins gets 2 thumbs up from me. I think it's a great film. I really love what Christopher Nolan has done with Batman, and I can't wait to watch the other 2 films. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Go ahead and drop a thumbs up down below. Comment what your favorite part of Batman Begins is. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel by hitting that little clapper if you want to see some more. Check out my other videos down in the description below. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Alright, see ya.